Hi, I'm Darrin Peppard. Welcome to the Leaning into Leadership podcast, the podcast dedicated to today's hardworking leader. Join me every Sunday for leadership insight, inspiration, and a little pep talk to keep you rolling down your road to awesome. Hi there, and welcome into the Leaning into Leadership podcast. I am your host, Dr. Darrin Peppard, and this week I'm really fired up to share with you my conversation with Dr. Jared Smith. Jared is the superintendent of schools in South Tama County School District, which is in Iowa, and Jared is actually transitioning from that role into another role as a superintendent, having been named recently the superintendent of schools in Waterloo Community School District, and he'll start that job in July of 2022. Jared's more than just a superintendent. He's definitely somebody who's super passionate about leadership, super passionate about helping others grow and continue to get better. Jared's an award-winning blogger. He's the host of the Group Project podcast, and recently, he released a book that has really taken the world by storm, titled Learning Curve, Lessons Learned on Leadership, Education, and Personal Growth. I'm super excited to share that conversation with Jared with you. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about professional development, specifically professional development for leaders. And let's be honest, we've all sat in those rooms where professional development was happening. And as a leader, we find ourselves questioning, how is this supposed to help me be a better leader? I had that exact same thought so many times. And I understand that there are professional development events that we as leaders need to be a part of so that we understand what it is that is going to be asked of our teachers or what it is that we're going to see them implementing new in the classroom. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's be honest, for leaders, there are times when professional development needs to be about leadership, about helping them be the best leaders they can possibly be. During this last year, we've seen a tremendous number of leaders transitioning out of the profession or into a different role, which means we're going to have a lot of new leaders into their roles as we go into the fall. That's why I've created high-performance leadership teams. This is a 2-day intensive workshop that takes your leadership team on a deep dive into their work with a spotlight on a common mission, leveraging each other for powerful student learning outcomes, elevating other leaders, building strong positive culture and climate, and having a laser-focused vision on the future of the organization. If this is something that your team is definitely in need of, maybe you have some new members of your team, maybe you just need a restart and a recharge, folks, let's have a conversation. After all of us want to have our team ready to rock and roll to be the very best they can be. We want to have teams that have shared aspiration statements and clear goals and clear action steps, and ultimately a plan for how do we collectively hold each other accountable to achieve the goals we want to see. This is why I've created high-performance leadership teams. This is why I want to sit down and have a conversation with you about what's happening on your team and how we can work together to build the perfect 2-day workshop and maybe some additional work going forward. That's high-performance leadership teams. Check it out at roadtoawesome.net. If you have any questions, make sure you email me at darrinmpeppard@roadtoawesome.net. All of that information is in the show notes. But let's get to today's guest. Again, I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Jared Smith recently, and the conversation was amazing. I hope you enjoy. All right, Jared, thank you so much for joining me on the Leaning into Leadership podcast, man. I've been looking forward to this. We've had a couple conversations before, but I mean, this is going to be awesome. So thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, man. I've been following your work, following all the different things you're doing, and I really appreciate you reaching out. And you're doing some cool things, man. So I'm just excited to be here.
Nah, I appreciate it. I really do. And you're doing some pretty cool stuff too. And this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about that because, I mean, some people have quite a bit going on, but Folks, this dude right here, Jared Smith, has an unbelievable amount of stuff going on, and he's rocking it at every turn. So this is going to be really cool to talk about all those different things that you've got going. But before we dive in too far, just for my listeners who maybe don't know who Jared Smith is, just give them a little taste of who you are, where you're coming from, what you do, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So, thanks for that introduction there too. I appreciate that. A lot going on, but I always say it helps. I don't have kids. It really helps when you don't have kids. You freeze up a little bit more time at night, so that helps out. But yeah, I'm actually in central Iowa. I'm outside Des Moines. Currently, a superintendent in a smaller to mid-sized district here in central Iowa. But actually, we talked before the show, just accepted a superintendent job about an hour north of here in Waterloo, in the Waterloo Cedar Falls area, which is a bigger district here in Iowa. So I'm excited for that. But I mean, you and I connected not just through the superintendency and the educational leadership, more right. on the speaking, the writing, the blogging, the podcasting, just like you, Darrin, I just enjoy, I left the classroom and I still have that itch to teach people what I'm learning through writing, through speaking, through podcasting. So yeah, I write. I've got a book out called Learning Curve. I'm working on a second book. We might talk about those a little bit. I've got a podcast as well I've been doing for a couple of years called the Group Project Podcast, kind of just connecting with educational leaders like you. I've been doing some speaking, not quite going national like you at this point, doing more some of the local stuff, some of the local keynotes here in Iowa, in the Midwest. But I'm really enjoying just anything, education, leadership, professional growth, all that stuff.
Yeah. So we'll get into maybe some of the questions I sent you ahead of time. Maybe we won't. I don't know. But I want to jump off of something that you just talked about there. And one, for anybody who's out there thinking, hey, I'd like to get into the speaker space. You and I talked about this, before we came on and hit the record button. People have to know that you're in the space to speak, or people have to know you're in the space to provide professional development or to fill in the blank, whatever it is, whether it's side hustle, full-time job, people have to know you're in that space to do that work. And so, you mentioned, doing some of the things in your local, in your local area within Iowa or within the region. I mean, that's really, I think, kind of how the whole thing gets started. And at least with my experience, and, I'm maybe, I don't know, like a quarter turn ahead of you in this process. I mean, I'm not 10 or 12 years into it, but one of the things that I've learned and I think is critical is it's all about relationships. It's all about connections and who and who discovers or hears you speak and says, wow, that's a message that needs to come to my school, to my district, something like that. What are you seeing in that area? Is that something that's been kind of parallel in your journey with this?
I agree. I always go back. I think 4 years ago, I had a conversation with a gentleman you might know. His name is Trevor Reagan. A lot of people know Trevor. He actually keynoted a conference I was at last week, and I was kind of the day two guy. We kind of talked about that before the show. He told me that first gig you get, whatever first speaking engagement it is, whether you're getting paid or not, just prepare your butt off and just kill it, right? And if you do such a good job, and we've talked about this before, you do such a good job in that one presentation, and then somebody hears you and they say, hey, we want you to come speak at this conference. And it just kind of spreads like that spider web, right? So, I do feel like if and I know your style too, you put a lot into each presentation and you make sure who's in that audience and you tailor it to them. It's not just a canned speech. It's always you tailor it to that audience. But the hope, at least for me, is when I get in that room and I deliver that speech, hopefully there's somebody in there that is that key person, that who and they're that decision maker back in their district or for their organization, and they say, hey, we want what you just said here in this location. So I completely agree with what you're saying. That's what I'm seeing here in Iowa as well.
Yeah, I mean, you just hit something on the head right there. Well, you hit a whole bunch of stuff on the head right there. But when I'm putting together, any presentation, especially when it's in front of a group of people who are the decision makers, I'm looking at who's my ideal client, who is that person that I'm speaking directly to. I mean, I have those individual client avatars, and when I'm putting that together, I'm speaking to that person with the belief that that person will be in the room, and others in the room similar to that person may also take that message and say, wow, we have to have that. I think that's a mistake sometimes that speakers will make. And actually writers sometimes with books, they'll be so broad trying to capture everyone that they don't hit that narrow scope of, I'm going to provide a message for this person. And there's probably a lot of this person in the room, and that's who you want to target. I think it's a nuance that I know I've learned probably in the last 9 months or so, compared to just show up, hey, here's my story, hope somebody likes it.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. And you're talking about the book too. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit, but that's tough when you're writing that book. It's like, it gets so broad at first, and like, how do I narrow it in there?
Yeah.
I feel the same way. Yeah, it's something I think you said you've learned it like in the last 9 months, last year. I think the more you keep doing it, the better you get at thinking through some of those things like you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like shooting layups or repairing a car engine or whatever. The more repetitions you get, the better you get. I mean, it's all about reps. It really is. And we are going to loop back to the book, definitely. And I'm going to ask you actually a little bit more about your writing process, because now I'm curious. I really, really am. So, but before we do that, I mean, obviously the title of the podcast is Leading into Leadership. And we have opportunities to provide leadership in so many different ways, especially in a superintendent role. But I mean, let's be frank. The last 2 years they've been a turd to be a leader in. I mean, it's really challenging, and what the heck, right? It is what it is. It's been difficult. There's no question about it. And the districts that I've seen and the schools that I've seen, in this last year that I've been, going to different schools around the country that have had the most success and maybe stayed the course the best were really driven by good, strong school culture. And I know that's something that's really important to you. You do some incredible things with school culture. I think that's one of the things that the two of us, really are drawn to each other for. Yes. Talk a little bit maybe about school culture or some things you've done intentionally in your district to maintain that culture through what was honestly a difficult time.
Yeah. So you literally just took the words out of my mouth. I've said that a few different times as well. It's like the ones that have the districts that have survived have had the positive culture, the positive leadership, and positive's kind of an overdone word, but we do a combination of things here. And I think it's important, we do some of the fluffy activities. I'm not going to lie. And I've shared some of these things on my blog, and some of the, the appreciation meals and the celebrations and that sort of thing, which are important. But I feel like the most important thing, and I've written about this too, is really making sure every staff member in your district feels valued and listened to. What I mean by that is, and I just did 2 of them today, I meet with all of our certified staff members to do one-on-one meetings. And we're not a huge district by any means. We've got about 120, 130 certified staff, or about 250 staff members total. But I will sit down one-on-one with them for 20, 25 minutes and just ask them 5 basic questions. And it always starts hey, what's new outside of work? Kind of to make the conversation kind of a little more personal, I guess you could say. But then we dig in hey, what is going well in the district? What is not going well? How can we make you feel more valued? And then the fifth question is, who can I compliment on your behalf? All 5 of those questions that I ask in those one-to-ones with our certified staff have purpose behind them. And here's the key too, is a lot of people will say, yeah, well, I have those conversations too. Well, how much do you actually follow up with it and actually follow through with, okay, 10 of our staff members said, and this is the example I used, like 10 of the first 12 staff members I met with back in October said they were burnout in early October. And I was like,
that's early.
Whoa, that's early. You're burnout already. We're not even 30 days into school. So right away, right away I said, well, how are you burnout? Like, what do you need from us? And they just said, we need more time. I'm covering classes twice a week during my planning period, my 45-minute planning period. I'm going to cover classes. I need more time. So long story short, we took that feedback and we went to our school board and said, our teachers need more time. They're already burnt out. How can we give them more time? And we end up building in additional early dismissals to give for planning time. So I think that culture climate is just listening to staff and making sure they have a voice and then actually acting upon that feedback.
Yeah, I think that's super critical. A lot of times I think, especially early career leaders, maybe an area where they will struggle is they think that listening is about listening for something that then you can respond to and then formulating that response while that other person is still talking. And, those who are really great at it are going to listen to hear what that other person is saying, and not just hear them, but to understand them, to empathize with them, to truly have like a core grip on what is it that they're sharing with me? What is it, that they're struggling with, especially in those kinds of conversations. It's really important that as leaders, we are really truly listening and not just giving it the lip service required to then come back with a response of, oh no, here's why we can't do that, or here's why you are wrong. It's no, I need to hear you. I just think that's so critical. And I know so many of the early career leaders that I work with and support, that's a big struggle, because I think, and I'm curious, just run with this statement. Early career leaders, I know I did it, think they need to be the 100% answer person, that they, are the all knowing, the all seeing, that they solve everybody's problems for them. Did you fall into the trap? Have you seen that?
Oh yeah. Yep. I think back to my assistant principal days, and I was an assistant principal for 8 years, which seemed like an eternity at the time. But yeah, I felt like you're exactly right. I felt like I always had to have the answer. I felt like you nailed it earlier. When people are talking during those first so many years, I don't think I was even listening. I think I was like preparing for the right thing to say, as opposed to like actually. And I think there was a little bit of nerves involved. I think, at the time I was probably like 28, 29. These people have been teaching for longer than I'd been alive, so there's a little bit of like, imposter syndrome or something, So I think there is just a lot of, you're right. I think it takes a long time. And I see it the same thing with our leaders here, where they feel like they've got to have the answers. There's just a little bit of ego involved, but also a little bit of like, hey, I need to prove my worth. And you're right. A lot of young leaders. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So now you're at a little bit maybe the opposite end of that spectrum. And one of the things that I really truly admire about you as a leader in your superintendent role is just how transparent you are with so much of what you do. Not just your day-to-day, but your decision-making process. I mean, everything is out there on social media for virtually anybody to digest. I'm sure it's more than just the social media stuff. I'm sure actually in the South Tama community, there's even more. But talk a little bit about that transparency. I mean, how did you get to that point? And what are, I don't know, maybe a pratfall or two that you've taken and said, ugh, yeah, wish I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. So, I think so. I'm just finishing up year 4 here, and first superintendency. So, first chance to really use the communication system that I prefer, I guess. I think it started early. I know it did, where we shared a couple things. Um, I would meet with the administrative team, and we would and our administrative team's not huge. It's just, 12 of us, I guess you could say. And I would say, hey, what do you think? Should we share this? Should we share the rationale behind a decision? And we weren't quite sure, but like, let's err on the side of communicating it and see how it goes and kind of monitor the response. And the more like transparent we were, the more we realized our community appreciated it and our staff appreciated it. I think one of the earliest examples was probably just with like weather related dismissals, like how we make decisions, try to be proactive and try to have protocols in place as opposed to being reactive. So we shared what those look like, and people like, whoa, we like this. So I think we started a little, we did a little bit, and then each year we've done a little bit more. And here's kind of what, a couple thoughts I have are, the classic, like every email you send as a public employee is really, I mean, people could access it if they wanted. They could access a lot within education. So if we know people could potentially access emails, records, policies, salaries, why not just give it to them? Why not make it so secretive? And I feel like most of the time, you said pitfalls, and there are some for sure. Most of the time, it's helped us. A couple of times, it's kind of bit me a little bit, and it's the 95% of the time you get it right makes up for the 5% you get wrong.
Sure.
Sometimes there is information that we've shared that, Google Docs, right? Like we sometimes we accidentally share the sharing settings. It's shared with, in school board meetings, for example. I like to share the documents. We do our school board meetings virtually, and we've got a lot of people who watch. And I love to share documents in the chat so people can follow along with us. Well, sometimes there's been, in an effort of transparency, I share documents, but sometimes there's been like student information in there that I probably shouldn't share, or staff information.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That if you dig far enough, if you click this link, this link, this link, you can get to certain things. So it's came back a little bit, but I just beg for forgiveness. And when you've built up that social capital long enough with your community, you can make a couple small mistakes and get away with it, is I guess what I'm saying. So it's been good. People, our staff really, really appreciate like knowing the inner workings of the district. And it's not just decisions made in isolation or behind some steel curtain or something.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think it really is important. I mean, obviously, as leaders navigated their way through the pandemic times, it was really important to be sharing whatever the protocols were, or whatever the processes were going to be for whether it was masks or, the vaccinations or even like quarantines or any of those kinds of things, because those were definitely things people wanted to know about. And the more they knew in advance, the better. Definitely took a lot of pressure off of leaders when things were really clear up front. And that was one of the little pitfalls for me during that time. Was there was at one point in time a change in the different regulations that we were following, and it just happened to butt up against a quarantine issue that we ran into, and so we hadn't gotten the new stuff out, but we had to follow it, and it didn't go so well. People are like, wait a minute, that's not the process. But it made me feel good because they knew what the process was, even though unfortunately the process changed right as we ran into an event.
So true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But those things happen. So, So let's shift gears slightly, but before we get to the book and some of the
Yeah.
other stuff,
Yeah.
um, tons of leadership turnover everywhere across the country right now. Superintendent roles, principal roles, new people rising into AP roles, a lot of people transitioning out through retirement or whatever the case may be. As somebody who's getting, now I say getting ready to step into your second superintendency, but it's April. You've already stepped into it. We talked about that before. It's already started. What would you tell a first year superintendent or principal as they're coming in this upcoming year? What's maybe one piece of some sage advice from Jared for that person, that early career leader who's stepping into that bigger role for the first time?
Yeah. We talked about it a little bit, but you know, we talked about it a little bit with like, hey, feeling it like you have to know everything. That's part of it. But a lot of people, almost every leader I've worked with, they always want to move really fast in year one. They want to implement their ideas, new initiatives, make waves, prove that they know what they're doing. And I made that mistake absolutely as a first year principal, high school principal. I was like, hey, I thought I had a lot of good ideas. I thought I could streamline a lot of processes. They were probably good ideas, but unless your people are bought into them, unless you do a good job of explaining why you want to do something and making sure people understand how it's going to work, like you've got to slow down. You've got to just take it slow. And that's what I'm trying to tell myself as I move into the new role. But I swear, every single new leader, whatever position it is, you listed off, assistant principal, superintendent, everybody's made at least one mistake about trying to go too fast without having that buy-in and making sure people understand. So that would be my one thing. I'm going to throw another thing in there too, is, there's more to life than work. I see a lot of administrators still just putting in so many hours, and it'll be there the next day. You don't have to stay from 6 to 6. You don't have to put in 10, 12-hour days. Like, don't burn yourself out that first year, especially. So those would be my two ideas.
I could have definitely used that advice as a first year high school principal. It was, for me, it was trying to do everything. That first year, I had 3 assistant principals, and there were points in time where I started to resent them because I didn't feel like they were doing anything. And that wasn't on them. That was on me. I'm almost positive it was you that had just shared something recently about delegating. And, when you're not willing to share responsibility, to trust people in the jobs that they're in. So, that might be, not that I asked the question of myself, but I'll throw it in as something else for new and early career leaders. If you've got people around you, trust the people around you, give them the opportunity to own the work and to do the work, because otherwise you're going to get exactly what you said on your second piece of advice. You're going to be working 12, 14, 16-hour days, and you're going to make yourself sick. You're going to wear yourself out. And that's when you start to make more mistakes.
Yes. Yeah. I know you mentor a lot of leaders and work with a lot of districts. Like, no matter how many times I tell our new leaders, like, delegate, do not put on your shoulders. Like, a lot of them still feel like they've gotta have that little power. I don't know what it is, but that's one of the trickiest things I feel like for new leaders, young leaders, is that delegation piece, like you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got people in those roles. You got to give them the opportunity to do the job, trust them to do the job, give them good feedback. Honestly, I think the best part of being a superintendent, I think the best part of being a high school principal was growing other leaders. And you do that only by delegating responsibility, supporting them, coaching them, giving them feedback both in the moment and after. That's really, as you can tell, I get a little bit passionate about that. That I think is what it's really all about.
Important stuff.
It is. So, hey, right on that same line with important stuff, let's talk about this book. Learning Curve. It is such a great book, folks. If you have not picked up a copy yet, I know it's available on Amazon. It's available on Jared's website. We'll put all that in the show notes too, by the way. But what a great book. Where did the concept come from? Where did the idea come from? What did your process look like?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking. I always you talked about like getting excited, fired up. I kind of geek out on this stuff, like the writing process, and I'm sure you do too. You know, like us who've published books, it's fun to listen to that stuff. So, you know, there's not a bunch, but there's a handful of business world books that are like, you call it blog to book, whatever you want to call it, but they're just short segments of ideas, 3 to 5 to 6 pages worth of just different ideas that are somewhat tied together, but just different concepts on a topic that you're passionate about. I mentioned it earlier. I'm passionate about education, leadership, and kind of that personal growth or lifelong learning, which I know you are too. So I really wanted to write a book that kind of tied together those 3 things: leadership, education, personal growth. But I'm not as good as you guys who can do like one big story that's all kind of tied together. Mine, I just don't know how to like connect all these different pieces. So I did it's basically like 25 independent chapters, each with about 6 or 7 pages, about just different topics that are interrelated, and they are important to school leaders. We talked about delegation. We've talked, hiring, retainment, teacher recruitment, and then we go into some personal growth ideas about sleeping and about fitness and about relationships and all that. So stuff that to me is exciting. I love reading, but I don't just read education books. I love reading all kinds of nonfiction books. So how could I take all these topics that I'm passionate about and just dump it all into one book? And that's basically what Learning Curve is. And it's about like some of my growth as a leader. And I mentioned in the book, like I was a pretty bad teacher and I was a pretty bad like assistant principal for a number of years until I woke up and realized, hey, unless you're willing to like put in the time and the effort to grow yourself and to read and to learn and to try some new things, like you're really going to struggle. So that's kind of, it's kind of a hard book to explain, but I had a lot of fun writing it, and it's a unique book. I think it's a unique book because it is kind of interconnected. And quite honestly, I brought it to 3 publishers ahead of time, and they didn't really like the concept. They said it was too choppy. It should have been more interconnected. And I thought, well, that's not my style. So I did it self-published and kind of navigated that world and learned how to kind of do that. It will maybe hybrid publishing, whatever you want to call it. But anyways, it's been a fun process. It's been super eye-opening. And you asked about my process. Everybody's got their things. Some people, they will take 3 weeks. They'll rent a cabin in the woods and they'll just hammer it out. Right. That's not me. I am like,
that's not me either. Yeah.
No, I'm chip away every day. Every day I come into the office first thing in the morning, nobody else is here, and I just write for like an hour. I feel like my mind is the freshest in the morning. I've got the ideas are flowing. I'm not worn out. So I write every morning for like an hour, and it took me about a year of doing that, and then a little bit more on the weekends to kind of pull that together. So that's my writing process. I enjoy it, but what's really cool, one last thing, is it ties into what I do during the day. I think about, okay, what worked during the day? Did this conversation with this employee work? Did this evaluation strategy work? Did this, whatever it might be, this way I led this meeting? And then I'll reflect on that in my writing about this worked, this didn't. Here's some tips to think about. Here's some things to avoid. And honestly, I said this in Learning Curve, 5 years from now, I might look back at what I wrote in this book and say, okay, I did not have it figured out. I made a lot of mistakes. So that's kind of the point of it, is we're always growing, we're always learning, and hopefully you're okay with looking back on it and saying, like, I did not know what I was doing and I'm growing from it. Very long-winded, Darrin. Sorry about that, but yeah, I enjoy
that's right on. Yeah, well, the thing I think I enjoyed the most about Learning Curve, believe it or not, is how it, in a way, in its own unique way, reminded me a little bit of one of my favorite authors, which is James Patterson. You're never more than a page and a half in a chapter in Patterson. So, with your book, it was like, I could just hit this one section, bang, I got it. You don't need to give me a 34-page, story connected to it. I mean, and you've got some stories in there and some elements that really, really hit home. But I liked how, how it just kind of, quick hitter. And at the same time, and now that I've gotten to know you a little bit more, I can see how it was like, this is just Jared's brain going. And honestly, that's the most genuine kind of writing. And I think readers, I mean, heck, you'd have pitched it to Rodas and we might have said, it's kind of choppy, dude. But, a lot of readers, that fits them well. Just let me hit this. If I just need a quick reference book about, a conversation with an employee or something to do with a hiring process or something, I can grab Learning Curve, bang. Okay. That's chapter 22. Zip, there I go. As opposed to even Road to Awesome. And I didn't talk much about hiring in there, but, you might have to go spend quite a bit of time in chapter 5 or something. So, is it a different style? Of course it is, but that's okay. And I mean, I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was great.
Well, I really I appreciate the kind words. I really do. I feel like the new age, I'm on I'm on the very old end of being a millennial. Okay. I think millennials were born like 82 or 83 and I was born 82 and everything older or younger. So I do feel like the millennial readers, the Gen, whatever comes in after that, Gen Z, I don't know. I can't keep it all straight, but their attention, right or wrong, their attention span is not like it used to be. I mean, right. Look at what 20-year-olds are, they're on TikTok and they're on Snapchat. I mean, like 10, 20-second segments. They're not sitting down to watch. Their entertainment is not the 3-hour-long movie. It's the 5-minute long video clip on YouTube. I feel like that is going to be a lot of the future of reading too, right or wrong. And some people might, some traditional authors might say that's terrible, but that's what I'm seeing from younger readers is they just want, like you said, those short little clips they can get in, get out real quick. So that's kind of my style. And I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So folks, definitely, if you haven't grabbed Learning Curve, make sure you do. So let's talk just briefly. I know you're working on a new project. You told me before the show that you don't even have a title for it. So we're not even going to pretend that there's a title, but you're working on another book. What can you tell people about it?
So what happened was Learning Curve. You talked about it earlier. The more reps you put in, the better you're going to get at something. And I'm sure you feel same way with your speaking, with your writing, with everything that you're doing. I feel the same way with my writing. I look back at what I wrote in Learning Curve and I'm like, gosh, I could have wrote that a whole lot better. Yeah. So and Learning Curve is 360 pages long. Like I had to stop at some point and I had like a bunch of ideas that didn't make it in there. And I don't know if you felt this way. Like when I wrote my dissertation, when I got done, I was like, what do I do next? Like, I'm just so used to writing. Like, I don't know what else to do. Same thing with my first book. I got done with writing and I felt like I went for a week without writing. And I thought, what do I do now? Like, it's almost my hobby. It's turned into my hobby. So the second book, I think it's going to be called Turning Points. We'll see. I think it's going to be called Turning Points because there's just so many turning points that happen in your life that like, oh, if that didn't happen, where would I have gone? What would the trajectory have been? But it's really just it's a follow-up from Learning Curve. And I think it's actually written a lot better, quite honestly. Not that I think learning curve was written well, but I feel like this is even, and the feedback I've gotten from my peer editor who has read it says, these are even better developed ideas. So it's kind of just some of the ideas that didn't make it into learning curve. And learning curve was pretty much written pre-COVID or right when COVID was happening. This is like now a year and a half into COVID, 2 years in. So it speaks to some of the changing dynamics within school districts, if that makes sense. I try to make the concepts evergreen. So like if you read this 20 years from now, it doesn't feel like it's just COVID, but it's still like, okay, right. How do you make it through the turmoil? Like whatever comes next 20 years from now, whatever that big COVID or recession, let's hope not, but whatever that big thing is how do you respond in schools? And that's the kind of the idea. So yeah, I think it's going to be out this summer. I'm super excited to get that out there and to let people just kind of like we talked about, like learn from our experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, so we'll have to bring you back on the podcast when the book's out so you can tell us a little bit more about it. Maybe we can expand a little bit more on now what is clearly a difference between the two of us. When I finished my dissertation, I didn't want to write another thing the rest of my life. 6 months later, I started writing a book. But at the time, okay. I thought there's no way I am ever going to write anything ever again. I was just so grateful to be done. And, I don't know, maybe that was my dissertation chair.
Yeah,
it is very different. It really is. Well, I was going to say my dissertation chair, really kind of pushed on me too, and kept reminding me, that hey, Darrin, the best dissertation is a finished dissertation. Let's wrap this thing up, because kind of like writing my book, I could keep going and keep going and keep going, but and just like this conversation, we could just keep going and keep going and keep going.
Fun,
but
man. I'm fun.
It is. I know, it's awesome. But last question for you today. And again, folks, I'm going to ask Jared also, how you can connect with him, but everything is in the show notes, all of his social media, contact information, all that kind of stuff. But I will ask him to give you that here in just a couple of minutes. But again, Jared, it's the Leaning into Leadership podcast. So right now, what are you doing? How are you leaning into leadership?
Yeah, in my role as superintendent, leaning into leadership, a couple thoughts come to mind. You mentioned it earlier, and I'm getting to the point now. I just turned 40. Okay, so I feel like I'm kind of like over the hill. Not. I mean, metaphorically.
Easy.
I feel like I'm finally at a point now where I feel like I'm starting to mentor more and more leaders, right? Like kind of like like you were saying earlier. So like that leaning into leadership, like I've really, really enjoyed just having more and more coaching conversations. I love meeting. I meet weekly with all of I have 12 direct reports, and I meet with 10 of them weekly for 30-minute one-to-ones. I'm getting better and better at those conversations of just listening, not giving the answers, trying to help them work through their situations and their problems. I just love, there's a book out there called The Effective Manager, which I love. You got to check that book out. It talks about delegation and one-to-one meetings. Love it. But leaning into leadership is just, how can I coach up people, like learning what I've learned throughout the years, but also I think leaning into leadership is also that lifelong learning. It's also like, I still don't have it figured out. Okay. And I think you feel the same way. I've read your stuff and I love like your blogs about, here's some things I learned. Here's some ideas, still learning. I think you can't say I'm leaning into leadership if you're not willing at whatever stage you're in. And I'm going to be leading, a large district in Iowa. And I'm still like, I don't have this figured out. And I'm telling the employees as I walk in there, I need to learn from you. I do not have this figured out. I want to learn. I want to listen. I want to have those conversations like we talked about. So those are the two things, it's having those coaching conversations, and then also being afraid to like not admit when you don't have it figured out and being vulnerable in those situations.
I think that is a huge deal right there. You touched earlier on ego, and sometimes the most seasoned and the most complete leaders, I won't say great leaders, complete leaders are the ones who have that emotional intelligence to know that, number one, you don't need to know it all. And number two, it's okay to be vulnerable and tell people, I don't know that, or I need your help with that, or whatever the case may be. I think that's outstanding. So for our listeners who just cannot wait to get more Jared, where do they find you? How do they connect with you? How do they make sure they get a chance to hear a little bit more from you?
So the first place I would go is to my website, which is drjaredsmith.com. Because if you go there, the first thing that's going to pop up is hey, do you want to sign up for the newsletter? If you sign up for the newsletter, I send you like all the different, like all kinds of just helpful information. You're going to get a free sample, like the free first 50 pages of my book. Then you're going to get like my top 100 books. You're going to get my top 10 culture hacks. You're going to get all this helpful information. And also at the website, you're going to have access to the blogs, the podcast. It's got links to my social media. But that's probably the easiest place. I would say just go there and go to drjaredsmith.com. And then everything else you want to find me, every other thing that you need from me is right there. So, yep, that's a great place to start.
That's outstanding. Again, folks, all that stuff's in the show notes, and you can check all of that out. Jared, man, it was so great to catch up with you. This has been an amazing conversation. I appreciate you so much. Good luck in your new role in Waterloo. Look forward to continuing to follow you, and we really look forward to that new book coming out.
Well, thank you too, man. I've enjoyed following your progress. You're doing some awesome things. I just saw, we talked before the show, you're getting some big time opportunities there to speak with some big time names. So I'm just enjoy following your progress as well. And I will be in Omaha soon. I think it's going to be this summer. So we're going to meet up for that drink. And what is it? Is it new? What's the cool downtown place? Old Market, right?
Old Market. Absolutely.
Let's meet up down there and hang out and swap some stories. So
100%. We will do it. Right on. Appreciate it, man.
All right. Thank you, man.
Wow, folks. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I've gone back through it multiple times, just really listening for all of the different gold nuggets that Jared laid down throughout that conversation. And I'm just really grateful for him coming on the show. Definitely some things in there that as leaders we need to be thinking about. I really appreciated how Jared talked about slow down. I love that he talked about that because so many of us make that mistake that we want to put our stamp on whatever it is that we're leading. And in that first year, we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this. Ultimately, that ends up biting us. It ends up backfiring. So definitely slowing down, one of the best takeaways there. And then I love that Jared said there's more to life than work. It will still be there tomorrow. I struggled with that so much. There was a point in time I know I was putting in anywhere between 12 and 14 hours every day. I was there 6 days a week, and it was pretty exhausting. So I appreciated that Jared talked about that. So hopefully that's something as leaders that you can take away those two items, and maybe there's more there. Maybe there's some other things there as well that you felt good about. But just an incredible conversation. And again, Jared, thank you so much for coming on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. And now it's time for a pep talk. Let's build right off of that last point that I talked about with Jared, that there is more to life than work. The weather's starting to change. It might be fighting back a little bit, but the weather is starting to change. And it's time for us to start thinking about getting out in the yard and getting things spruced up, maybe getting some flowers, planted and those types of things. But that's exactly the type of self-care that we need to be doing this time of year. It's an exhausting time. You see the finish line. You're making your way through state testing. All of those other things that are there. There's all those other things that are coming. I've got to finish my budget. I've got to finish getting everybody hired. There are all kinds of stressors that surround you. But this week, just take a couple deep breaths. let yourself not work 12 or 14 hours a day. Even if it's just one day. Maybe it's difficult for you to say, hey, I can't just stop for an entire week, but maybe just one day. Go home a little bit early. Be at your home. Be with your family. Be out in the yard. Play with your dog. Whatever it might be. Give yourself permission to not be tied to your work. There's more to life than work, folks. Get out there and enjoy it. You deserve it. Until next time, I'm Dr. Darrin Peppard. Thank you for joining me on the Leading into Leadership podcast. Thank you for listening to the Leaning into Leadership podcast, brought to you by Road to Awesome. Don't forget, click subscribe, give a review, and share this with somebody who might also enjoy leaning into leadership.